Hello and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here, we host a distinguished guest and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran trying to convince your niece who just moved to Nashville that she should cover a ballad that you wrote in the late 1980s, or a scrappy upstart paying $2,000 a month to share a house with that person's niece and 4 other people in East Nashville, this is your show. Because ultimately, it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. What's up, you guys? It's the last Friday of April 2019. I'm glad that you're here. Thanks for being here. Today's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. All right, built by musicians, for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay someone called a web developer to get a website made back in the day. This is the way that it was when I first started out. It would just be like some guy that you found on Craigslist named like Chad, who wore Jinkos still at the age of like 26, and who would charge you like $1,500 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. So that's terrible. But luckily, we don't have to do that anymore because it's the future and we can have very nice things now. And that's where Bandzoogle comes in to solve our problems. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in. That is hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, tools to sell your music and merch, commission-free. I'm serious there, commission-free. It also has mailing list tools to grow your fan list and send newsletters, social media integrations, and live support from their musician-friendly team 7 days a week. And if you are as computer illiterate as I am, that will be good news for you. So the Working Songwriter Podcast listeners can go to bandzoogle.com, try it for free for 30 days, and use the promo code TWS to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. So thank you, Bandzoogle, for supporting the show, and thank you to all you listening out there for heading over there and using the promo code TWS to support the show. Okay, if you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming months, right now I'll be like 2 places, May 2nd in Washington, D.C., and June 1st in Columbia, Maryland. So come on out. Our guest this month, Amanda, will be on the road as well, and I promised her I'd read out some of these tour dates. So she will be May 10th in San Francisco, the 11th in L.A., May 17th in Atlanta, the 18th in Nashville, the 30th in St. Louis, May 31st in Kansas City, June 1st in Denver, June 6th in Vancouver, June 8th and 9th in Portland, Oregon. So catch her out there on the road. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, there's a few things that you could do to help. You could head over to Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you love. You just head to their site, you type in my name, Joe Pug, or you type in The Working Songwriter, and you sign up to kick in basically a voluntary subscription every month, a few bucks every month to help out the show. Not because you have to, but because you feel like it and you won't miss a few bucks every month. The other way that you could help, and this has nothing to do with money at all, is you could just tell a friend about the show. If you dig this show and know a few other people who you think might dig it too, mention it to them, text it to them, email it to them. Try to get some more people listening to the show for me, and that's all I ask. So thanks so much for being with us this month. I really hope you enjoy this conversation that I had with Amanda. Our guest this month began her career as a street performer, and she has since arrived as an iconoclastic songwriter who plays to thousands of people in theaters across the world. Amanda Palmer was one half of the Dresden Dolls, an early aughts cult favorite that played, in their words, Brechtian punk cabaret. She has since moved forward into a wildly successful solo career under her own name. Palmer was one of the first artists to fully embrace crowdfunding. When the platform Kickstarter first launched, she posted a campaign with a modest goal to finish a project. Very famously, that project ended up raising around $1.2 million from over 24,000 supporters in 30 days. She's continued that crowdfunding through the site Patreon, where she has more subscribers than only a handful of other creators. It cannot be overstated. Amanda Palmer has pioneered an entirely new business model for working artists. NPR has written of her unconventional approach to art, quote, "Above all else, Amanda Palmer knows her audience. It's not just that she appeals directly to thousands of listeners to crowdfund her music, or incorporates fans into her live shows, or writes songs that connect on a visceral, emotional level. Her audiences actually feed and inform her work. Their stories, infused with unique fragments of their lives, are woven into her words, giving even her boldest artistic statements a note of intimacy and specificity." And Pop Matters has also noted, quote, "In a musical age where singles are debated in boardrooms and artists employ teams to produce tweets engineered for maximum public acceptance, it's refreshing to have an artist who remains genuinely unafraid to risk failing spectacularly in the service of making honest art." Amanda was in D.C. last month to play the National Theater, and she was kind enough to give me about an hour of her time on a show day.
Yeah, it's really interesting on the road. I'd forgotten about this, not intellectually, but physically. My voice becomes an expense.
I know.
I forget. And then I get back on the road and I'm like, oh, right.
Do you mean an expense in the sense that, like, you have so much to
everything
spend?
I spend
Yep.
is just what is stuff I don't have left over for the show.
I know. I know. Vocal maintenance is, that's a big one. I play a bit too, and it got a lot easier. I stopped smoking about 5 years ago, and that, like, was like a supercharge for the voice. But for me, it's like sleep, man. That's what it really comes down to.
That's what everyone who's a vocalist is like, what are the secret tricks? I'm like, there's only one.
Sleep.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's the only trick.
That's
no herbal remedies.
No.
Just 8 hours.
The singer spray. One time when I got sick, I used, someone gave me prednisone, and that worked for like a night, but...
I did that once.
Yeah.
I did. It's kind of blazingly hot in here. I got a rock doc.
Yeah.
Once.
Yeah. So if you got a big one, I guess that makes sense, but it's not like a day-to-day, type deal. Welcome to D.C.
Thank you.
It looked like on Instagram, rolled into Union Station with not but a ukulele and a tube of chapstick, as Corky St. Clair would say.
I set my phone up on my suitcase to take that selfie.
Okay, so you had one more piece of luggage.
I needed something to put the phone on.
Fair enough.
That's why I brought the suitcase.
Well, hey, take me back to Massachusetts. Getting started, you were very involved in theater in high school and in college. Did you have a teacher that made a particular difference for you that got you into it, or did you find it on your own?
I had a couple massively inspiring teachers. One drama director in particular, who I still work with.
Really?
To this day. Yeah, he opened the door from like standard, boring, sweet, conservative community theater into theater is actually a thing that can make you feel deeply and change your life kind of theater. And it was extraordinary, like so many other synchronicities in my life. Like, I don't know what this guy was doing in Lexington High School in Lexington, Massachusetts, and why and how they gave him the gig. But the thing that actually made him stand out against all of the other teachers that I had is that he treated us like peers. You know, we were 15, 16, 17 years old, and he treated us like we were professional theater people in our 20s and 30s with something to say. And he encouraged us to not slack and to actually reach very deep and find an authentic expression of self, which was not something that was happening to me in my other classes.
Right. Yeah, not exactly a Christmas production of Our Town.
And and unsurprisingly, we loved it. We loved him. I walked into the drama department, and all of a sudden I felt real. I did not feel that way walking into my history class and my geometry class and, even my shitty English classes with my teachers who were just sort of doing it by the book, like Dead Poet Society. There were the teachers who were just opening up the textbook and saying, turn to page 53 and could you read this aloud? And this is what a poem is and da-da-da. And then there were the teachers who you could tell were trying to make you feel something or actually trying to teach you something.
Mm. And it just sounds like that's coming from a place in him of just like respect for his students, respect that they understand what's going on, not patronizing them, just kind of respecting their, even though they're not legally adults yet, respecting their creative voice.
Well, I mean, teenagers are some of the most creative forces in the world. They're in this bizarre liminal transition of self, right? So, I mean, I had some of my most inspired creative moments in my life when I was 15, 16, and 17. And I'm not just talking about the moments when I was stoned and on acid. Like, I was just really, like, you're trying to figure everything out. Everything is new. Everything is weird. And your synapses are firing on high, and you're making connections between one thing and another. And you're figuring out that there are rules, and you're figuring out that the rules don't matter, and you're figuring out that you can break the rules, and you're not yet in the habit and the confines of being an adult.
Mm-hmm. Was there a particular moment doing those plays with that particular teacher? Was there a particular moment where you knew, like, oh, this is going to be me going on to the future? I'm going to do this for a living in one way or another. I'm going to be a performer. Was there like a latent moment where that happened, or did it just kind of become apparent to you over time?
No, I mean, everyone always wants there to be that, like, and then this moment happened. The moment was my entire childhood and life, and I was always really drawn to the stage, and I was always really drawn to the piano, and to the idea of people gathering and performing and parading and celebrating. Like, those were the things that really attracted my attention, even when I was 10 years old. And from the minute I figured out that you could just write songs on a piano, that you didn't need to have permission to do it or go to school for it, you could just punk rock it out by figuring out chords. I think everything in my cultural diet, from my Prince records to MTV to, seeing Davy Jones guesting on the Brady Bunch to to the whole idea of rock and roll, I knew that was my heart's desire from a really young age.
Wow. And that kind of ethos of just saying to yourself, I don't need a theater, I don't need a cast, I don't need a script, I just need my own kind of creative force and maybe an instrument. You carried that through to its fullest potential when, after college, you basically traveled the world very famously as a street performer, as the 8-Foot Bride. When did you find out about the culture of street theater and street performance? Where did you find that?
Mostly in Europe, but also just traveling around on my own. So I think one of the things that I didn't realize was super significant in my childhood was Harvard Square, which was not far from where I grew up, and it was sort of, it was our equivalent of a night out in the city. It was like, our parents sticking us in the back of the Volvo and taking us to Steve's Ice Cream in Cambridge. And Harvard Square, to me, was that was the city. That was where the people were, where the action happened. And Harvard Square, a little did I know as a child, and I didn't actually really find out until much later, had a rich, important history of street performance.
Really?
and not every country in America has it. And there's a beautiful, untold history of busking, street performance, street theater in America. And some cities have it, some cities don't. Some town squares have it, some don't. And, you don't think a lot to ask, well, why? Why does this city have dozens of street performers and this city has none? A lot of it has to do with the laws. A lot of it just has to do with the tradition. A lot of it has to do with the weather. And I grew up knowing that there was this thing called street performance, that there was a person on that corner with a guitar and they were collecting money, and there was a person over there and they were juggling and they were collecting money. And it was as normal as television and cereal and all the other things that were in my environment. And then when I traveled Europe as a teenager, and then in college and stuff, there's a much more common tradition in Europe of living statues. So in Paris and London, in parks, in public places where there's lots of tourists. I don't remember the first time I saw one. It was probably in New York City somewhere. But I did, I think, at some point have a light bulb moment, not one that I could recall.
Sure.
But I remember looking at someone painted up and standing on a box, and I just remember looking at them and thinking, wait, like, anyone could do that. You just have to have the balls to do that. And it's a pretty weird thing to do, but, like, I could just get up and do that. I'm weird enough. I would do it. I know how to do costumes and makeup. And so I experimented for the first time when I was living in Germany abroad when I was about 20. Okay. I went out and sort of bought costume pieces and tried that for the first time. And then that actually did change my life, because there was no, again, like, this would have a resonant effect in the themes of my life as a musician, but there was nobody in charge. I could just stand up, put out a hat, no boss, no hours, no rules, no schedule, and really create my own destiny. And I loved it.
And actually make money, too.
I made a ton of money.
Yeah.
Yeah, surprising amount of money.
Just on a nuts and bolts level, on that time while you're doing the street performance full time, what does a day look like? Like, what time do you get up? Like, where are you staying? Do you put your money in a bank? Like, just really, like, on a micro level, like, what does that look like?
I love that you asked me that, because no one ever asks me that stuff, and it's pretty fascinating. So one of the things that made my life possible was a relationship that I had with the owner of an ice cream store in Harvard Square. And I worked for the ice cream.
Steve's Ice Cream?
No,
okay.
Steve's was gone by then.
Fair enough.
It is still called Toscanini's, owned by a really friendly arts patron, creative, eccentric type named Gus Rankatori. Okay. And Toscanini's is one of the places in Cambridge where, like, all of the musicians would get a day job, because the schedule was flexible, and, your compatriots are working there, and the boss didn't mind if you had a mohawk and piercings.
Sure.
So everyone flocked to a couple of ice cream stores that also did coffee, and Toscanini's was one of them, and I was one of the employees. And then, one day I just sidled up to Gus and I said, it's summer. I'm thinking about street performing. I need a place to put all of my gear. I noticed that there's a couple corners in the basement that don't really have any stuff in them. Do you mind if I just leave these milk boxes and costumes and makeup box, like, in the basement?
Sure.
No, go right ahead. And that made it possible for me to actually have a base camp, without having to bring my entire rig from home, which I would have had to do in a car, or, so I could just bike to work. Yeah. I lived probably, 2 miles from the ice cream store. I biked to work. I'd lock up my bike. Sometimes I would do an ice cream shift, and sometimes I wouldn't. And I would go down to the basement. I would check the weather. I would sort of, like, hang out, have a coffee, have a cigarette, because I was smoking back then.
Oh, those were the days.
I would look at the entire vibe. I would write in my journal a little bit. I'd roll out of bed whenever I wanted. I had the ultimate bohemian existence. And then at, like, 1 o'clock on a weekday or a weekend, I would, I would sidle down into the ice cream basement employees-only bathroom, sit on the toilet, stick up a mirror that I kept hidden away, put on my white face paint, put on my wig cap, put on my wig, brush my wig out, put on my wedding dress, put on my gloves, powder my face, put on my veil, gather up my skirts that were going to cover up the milk crates that I stood on, get the pot that my money went in, stick it all. And then the best moment was coming up through the basement, because I had to walk through the store, out of the basement door, into the street to go walk over to my pitch, which is where I would stand.
Yeah.
And so these people who were just standing in line for ice cream would like look to the right and all of a sudden see this ghost carrying a bunch of milk crates.
It's a value add for Tuscanini's ice
Oh
cream.
my God. And Gus didn't mind. He thought it was hilarious. I loved it. And I would always that was one of my favorite moments of the day, was just like walking wordlessly through the crowd of ice cream people while they all just were like, what the fuck is happening? Why is this ghost coming out of the basement? And where is she going with those milk crates? And then I would walk 2 blocks to my normal pitch, set up my milk crates, stand on them, cover them with skirts, stick my hat out, and then I would stand there for anywhere between 1 to 4 hours. I would take a little break in between. And on a great day, I'd make hundreds and hundreds of dollars. On a bad day, I would make $50, but you never knew what you were going to get.
Weird question, but does standing in place like for 4 hours, was that kind of like a workout in a way? Like, did it keep you in pretty good shape? I'd imagine it kind of would.
It's not great for your legs.
Sure.
And actually, if you talk to anyone in the military, standing in a stiff position is takes its own kind of psychic energy. So I would actually move around very subtly, like in a kind of a mild Tai Chi way under my dress, because you couldn't really see, as long as I moved slowly, you couldn't see my feet shifting. But it was actually a really beautiful kind of meditation.
I'll bet.
I would just stand there watching the world go by, totally mindfully waiting for a human connection, for an interaction with somebody. And I loved it. Yeah. I found it really peaceful, and it also really gave me. I write about it a lot in my book, but it sort of gave me performance balls of steel, because it's you against the music. Like, there's no stage, there are no lights, there's no protection. Mm-hmm. It's just you. So if some crazy person comes up to you, there's no security. Like, you just have to deal with it. And I learned how to deal with a lot of harassment and abuse. And the amazing thing about it is that it was a study in non-reactivity, which a lot of martial arts and mindful practices are basically like the art of sitting with whatever's happening. You have an itch, you don't scratch it. Someone comes up and starts shouting at you, you don't blink. And I actually think that, the hundreds of hours that I spent up on that box were an incredible education in so many ways. And non-reactivity was one of them. Trusting people was another. Really feeling the beauty of a fast, deep human connection and then immediately being able to let it go. That was another one of them.
Amanda's impulse to play the 8-foot bride on the street was a stroke of artistic inspiration. Its effect on her life, though, was much more tangible and practical. It kept the lights on. It made her money. And if you can't pay rent or buy ramen, you can't very well make art. A common misconception about working artists is that they don't think about money. In reality, every working artist I know has to think about money more often than does the company man. As a matter of fact, for every company man that dreams of being a musician traveling the world, there's a corresponding musician dreaming of a paycheck that arrives every 2 weeks with the taxes taken out and the 401k matched. Recently, I was reading the Joe Nick Petoskey biography of Willie Nelson. Reading about his early years, I was really struck by the reoccurring theme of Willie picking up work to keep the lights on. So, here's an incomplete list of things that Willie Nelson did to make money before he became Willie Nelson. A farmhand baling hay, a farmhand picking cotton in Abbott, Texas for 75 cents per 100 pounds. I'll say that again, 75 cents per 100 pounds of cotton picked. Guitar player in a Czech polka band for $6 a show. shoe shine on the Hillsborough Courthouse steps for 50 cents a pair, tree trimmer for the Asplund Company for 80 cents an hour, factory worker on a saddle-making assembly line for the Ozark Leather Company, radio DJ, concert promoter, private in the U.S. Air Force, door-to-door salesman of Bibles, encyclopedias, Singer sewing machines, and Kirby vacuums in Fort Worth, Texas. There you have it. If you're getting ready to enter a creative life, get ready to roll up your sleeves, put on your 8-foot bride dress, and sell some damn encyclopedias.
Well, I knew it was time to hang up my street performing hat because I was making enough money as a musician.
There you go.
And again, it was a very gradual, random transition. You know, it wasn't like one day I said, I'm all finished with this. You know, I'm going to be a full-time musician. I just got so busy touring and managing my band and not needing the money from street performance that it didn't occur to me to go out. There was a really interesting time, this Venn diagram of jobs where I was in the Dresden Dolls, but we weren't making any money yet. But we were touring and playing our asses off. And I was a street performer. And I was working. It was during the .com boom, so I was working as a freelancer for a naming and branding company, coming up with .com domains for emergent .com companies. And I was a stripper and a dominatrix, all like in the same week. I would be doing all of those jobs, and they were. And when you boil them all down, a lot of it was the same skill set.
Even the .com naming?
Yeah, it was a kind of a creativity of what speaks to people. You know, what lights up what parts of a human being's brain when you're trying to explain something to them. And you know, the same thing that made me a good company namer was the same thing that made me a good lyricist.
Yeah.
Same skill set.
No, I mean, yeah, the creative muscle, it really is like a Leatherman. It can do so many. It's a muscle that when you work it, you're surprised at how competent you can be at a plethora of jobs.
Yeah, it's a cross-applicable creativity.
It is. What did those first Dresden Dolls tours look like? What do you remember the most from that period of your life?
A lot of bad gas station food.
That's changed now. I know that's changed. They got good food in gas stations.
No, they don't. They still don't have good food in gas stations. It's gotten a little better.
Well, it's at least better than it was when I started touring in the mid 2000s, and it was
a lot of driving, a lot of sitting in cars, a lot of looking out the window, a lot of. I just wrote a blog about this a couple days ago about touring and discipline and time and energy. And, you know, I was in my mid-20s. I was heavy on certain kinds of discipline and really light with certain others. You know, you were just talking about quitting smoking. And, you know, one of the things that I was really proud of myself is that, you know, I wasn't a heavy smoker, but I was I was a happy ritual social smoker. And I quit right before the Dresden Dolls made our first real expensive studio record, because I was just like, are you in or are you out? And you can't be a singer and a smoker.
You just can't.
Just can't.
Yeah.
And I was like, you're never going to forgive yourself if this album tanks and you don't make it as a rock and roller. So like you're going to have to quit smoking. So I did. But, you know, I also didn't really understand sleep, alcohol, carbs,
man.
talking all night. Like there were a whole lot of things I hadn't learned yet. So, I mean, when I look back at those early touring days, I just kind of shudder. Like I look at the after parties where I stay up all night till 5 a.m. eating pizza and drinking beer and screaming about politics and then wondering why I didn't have a voice the next day.
Of course. Yeah, of course. I must be sick. Yeah, sure. I made it a policy a couple of years ago to only drink after I was finished with the show, and it kind of blew my mind because before that I couldn't imagine getting on stage without a drink.
Yeah.
That's just how it was. And now I look back and I'm like, man, I would drink 8 beers and get on stage. Like you couldn't pay me to drink 8 beers and get on stage at this point. I wouldn't be able to perform at that point.
Yeah, I even during this tour right now, like I'm about to do a show in 5 hours, and I've always loved that sweet spot of like, oh, like one drink, which just sort of loosens you up. But even then, I have been trying to be, with this show in particular, it's a 3-hour show.
And it's solo.
Yeah. I am talking or singing or playing for 3 hours. And it's a marathon. And I've actually noticed that like even that one drink knocks me a little bit off my game. And it's a hard cost benefit analysis because you really have to look at yourself like an athlete.
Yes.
And it is this strange thing in the entertainment and the music business. Like we're just surrounded by alcohol. People, how weird is it that we do a job where people expect you to drink on the job?
And you're a little bit shamed if you don't do it. Like before, kind of like
And you feel straight edge and boring because everyone else around you is at a party, loosened up, and you're like, rah, rah, rah. But it's also bizarre. Like, what other field of work are you encouraged to work drunk?
No, I know.
Surgery, accountants, plumbers, construction.
No, it reminds me of that Onion article. The Onion article was the new microdosing. I drank at work all day.
Yes, just a little bit.
Yeah. But no, it's really strange. It's literally no other job. No other job. And also, I look back. Hindsight's always 20/20, and you and I can look at this the same way. It's like, what if I just hadn't been drinking all of those years? Like, what if I had just been sober on stage? Like, what would have I learned? What would have I retained? One of the things that has actually broken my heart as I read more about alcohol and sleep is that when you sleep after drinking, your brain doesn't really retain and process what you learned that day. Oh.
I know, right? Isn't it heartbreaking? Like you don't get the quality and amount of REM sleep to basically defrag, emotionally code, and put everything where it needs to be. Your brain on alcohol just kind of sits and shuts off, and you wake up the next day feeling relatively unrested.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And when I looked at it that way, I was like, oh, fuck, man, that means that everything I was learning every night on stage, because you're always learning every wrong note, every missed cue, every great joke, every whatever. You're always learning on stage, and then there's this bounty of material that your brain could be sorting through at night.
Right.
And if you soak your brain in 6 drinks, all of that wisdom just flies out the window.
But I will go back to what you started this point with, which was if you can get to that one zone, like the one glass of wine, the one right before the show, like we've all had that show where you're like, yeah, that was pretty much perfect. Like I rode my metabolism perfectly into the first note. And
it's sort of like being an athlete. You just have to plan what goes into your body and when you use which muscles very, very deliberately. So I know lots of musicians who do they take a shot before they go on stage. It's like medicinal.
Yes.
It's not even pleasurable.
Carolyn Wonderland, that really great blues guitar player from Texas, she is sober, but she eats a jalapeno before she goes on stage.
Oh, shit.
Get one of those like Scoville buzzes.
Yeah, wow. You know what I would do if I had the dough? I would have an ice bath.
Oh, man.
I've been doing morning ice baths, and they've changed my life.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, so I've been, look.
Where are we going with this?
The most I can, because I've read a little bit about this and I've heard some people talk about it. The most I can make myself do is be in a hot shower and slowly turn it to cold.
Oh, see, I can't handle that.
Okay,
I need a
you just gotta go in?
immersion.
No, man.
Because to me, the cold shower is kind of harder to handle because it's coming in, it's not fully.
Yeah.
But I also, that's in keeping with my personality. I'm like a total all or nothing. And I can handle it. I can handle it at 11, and I can handle it at 0. But the middle grades are harder.
Well, yeah, I'm from a different perspective there. All right, so when you're making $1 million, we'll have the ice bath set up here.
Private ice bath.
You were so associated, probably from your TED Talk and also your book. You're so associated with some of the business mechanisms with music. Does the business part of it, do you find joy in that, or is it a means to an end just so that you can make your art and bring money home to your family? And where do you kind of come down on that? Is it something that gives you joy to do and brings energy to you?
Yeah, but I think it brings me joy because I don't separate it out much from the art. It's sort of like asking about any complicated relationship, like, does your marriage bring you joy? And it's like, well, sometimes, but I don't compartment. I think part of what makes me good at it is that I don't compartmentalize the business from the art. To me, it's all about, like, is it connecting or is it not connecting? And so when the business does well, and, let's say I sell a lot of tickets for the show tonight and that results in a check, I'm not looking at the money numbers. Those aren't bringing me joy. What's bringing me joy is that I'm going to be able to connect with 1,500 people. And the business always just leads back to the art, and the art always leads back to the connection. So, the focus is never the success in itself or money in itself, or I killed it in the business arena today in itself. If I killed it in the business arena, it meant something. It meant that I connected with more people. It meant that, people valued my work and what I had to say and gave me some kind of prize. Not being able to separate that out may be naive, but I think it's also one of my superpowers.
Yeah. Can you speak a little bit to it? And you've spoken on this a million times, but just for our listeners here, you've spoken before about how when you were street performing, people would yell at you. Some people would yell and say, get a job, something like that, and you'd feel kind of shame for that. And then when you moved onto the platform of Kickstarter and Patreon, some people said some shitty things about that too, and you realized, you had this realization that you were being shamed in the same way, and that you had learned to get over that shame of asking, that you had been able to, for yourself, destigmatize it and say this isn't begging. How were you able to, what were some of the strategies and techniques that you used to get past that kind of latent shame that we all kind of feel sometimes?
Oh, it's such a good question. I think there's a couple things to say there. One is that our poor culture has really twisted up and warped the way we treat art and behold and care for the people who make art. And I think most of it has happened because capitalism, and it's very hard for people to remember why art is important, like why we need it, why music's good, why art is good, why we should have it in our diet. People get very distracted and wrapped up in the commercial side of things, like what things are worth, what people are worth, what's of value. And, if you can imagine a wedding or a funeral without music, you can just go straight back to why we as human souls need it. We need music. We use it to stay human and to connect with each other and to share stories in a way that just words can't do. And someone has to make that stuff.
Right.
The artists. And yet we live in this culture that really does shame and belittle people who believe that they want to go into the arts in a way that's kind of bizarre when you consider that, we think of art as this really important, holy thing on the one hand, and then we'll really shun and belittle people who say that they want to do that thing. The thing that got me through it and out of it, I think, the most important thing was connecting on a very basic, constant level with the other human beings who came to my concerts, listened to my music, and gave me a kind of a immediate feedback that I was helping them. And since Brian was the drummer of the Dresden Dolls, since we signed after every concert, every night, whether we were in a bar or a theater or a festival, whatever, We would always set up a table or an area where people could come meet us. And so I met tens of thousands of people as I was touring the globe in the first few years of the band, who got to just come up to me and hold me and say, listen, your music is really helping me. In this way, it's helped me get through a depression. I was raped, and this song helped me. I've been nursing my mother, and I'm lonely, and this album is really speaking to me. And you could only hear, once you've heard these stories again and again and again, the 10th one, the 100th one, the 1,000th one, the 10,000th one, you can't hear all those stories and then believe someone who's saying, yeah, what you're doing is bullshit and doesn't fucking matter. You just don't believe those people anymore.
Right.
You have too much proof positive on
right.
the other side that what you're doing is actually of value. Like a kind of a concrete emotional value. And, once I had heard enough of those stories, they would just shore me up and remind me that what I was doing was important. It was hard to put a price tag on. It was hard to put in a box. It was hard to explain. But I knew, at my core, I knew that doing this job, writing these songs, getting on stage and delivering them was a real concrete gift that I could give to the world, that it wasn't narcissistic. It wasn't just selfish. It wasn't just look at me, that it was actually contributing something to the society that I was living in.
Do you think the level of seriousness with which you've taken your job over the years, though, don't you think that that's related with how seriously people have taken you? Because I agree with you that the audiences and society at large has a responsibility in some ways to support and patronize art. But I think the other side of that coin is that you got to take your job really fucking seriously. You have a real responsibility to that audience. Do you look at it that way, as a responsibility to them, or?
I don't look at it as a responsibility to the world or to them any more than I think they feel they have a responsibility to me. I find myself with questions like that always coming back to the metaphor of, interpersonal relationships, friendships, and marriages. It's like, well, do you have a responsibility to your husband? And I'm like, well, no, I wouldn't call it that. It's a relationship. Mm-hmm. And a relationship is kind of always based on a sort of mutual responsibility, but not a nasty one, mm-hmm. a loving one. One where you don't feel coerced, one where you don't feel, castigated, punished. There's when you have two entities in some kind of mutual understanding and respect, it shouldn't feel like that. And a fan artist or, artist audience relationship is the same thing. Everyone's got to want to be there. It's consensual. I want to be here. I have this thing I can do for you. You want to be there. You want to hear what I have to say. That, that's when a show feels good. That's when a relationship feels good. That's when sex feels good.
Right.
These things are all the same. And, so do I have a responsibility? I don't know. I have a responsibility to myself to feel like I'm not bullshitting you and that I'm doing my job authentically. If I had to say I have one responsibility, it's that.
To yourself. And to a gift that you've been given, or?
To the truth. Mm-hmm. To not being a bullshitty artist, to sticking to my guns, to actually challenging myself to share more and more of the truth, to not take the easy way out. That's why people respect me as an artist, not because they know what I'm going to do and they're going to like it, but because I'm not afraid to run into the dark and grab people and take them with me.
You're not afraid to walk through the ice cream parlor with the 8-foot bride costume.
Exactly.
This month's episode is brought to you by 30 Tigers, and more specifically, the forthcoming album from the man himself, Josh Ritter.
1, 2, 3, 4.
If you're a listener to this show, you've probably known and loved Josh's music for many years. I certainly have. I can remember him playing Girl in the War on Letterman and thinking to myself, this is amazing. It's actually possible for songwriter music to still break through in this modern world. He spent the last 2 decades putting out critically acclaimed and beloved albums. It's major news anytime to songwriters when Josh releases an album, but this time around, he's teamed up with Jason Isbell to produce it. Jason's band, the 400 Unit, with Amanda Shires, play on the album. This is basically the musical equivalent of Kevin Durant joining the Warriors. It's really not fair to the rest of us trying to write and record albums. The album is entitled Fever Breaks. It comes out today, Friday, April 26th. Let's check out this new song, Blazing Highway Home.
And may the angel sing you country songs. Your mama sang you back when days were long. More beautiful than anything you know. While you find yourself a blazing highway home.
Again, the new album is entitled Fever Breaks, recorded in Nashville's historic Studio A and produced by Jason Isbell. It's out today, Friday, April 26th. So head on over to Spotify to give it a listen. And if you enjoy it as much as I do, head on over to Josh's website to pick up a copy on vinyl. Amanda was speaking about the revelation of meeting the people who actually listened to her music and learning what her music had meant to them. It allowed her to tune out a lot of other external noise and be who she was meant to be as an artist. Now, searching for a poem that could best encapsulate that revelation, I backed myself into a corner. You see, I usually try to feature poems on this show that many listeners aren't familiar with. I like to throw some light on poets that aren't taught in your standard freshman year English class, but sometimes you just have to go with the classic. Sometimes you have to go with the obvious. Sometimes you just have to read some Uncle Walt. And no other poem can better describe Amanda's realization about her true artistic identity than the 4th stanza of Walt Whitman's Song of Myself. Trippers and askers surround me, people I meet, the effect upon me of my early life, or the ward and city I live in, or the nation. The latest dates, discoveries, inventions, societies, authors old and new. My dinner, dress, associates, looks, compliments, dues, the real or fancied indifference of some man or woman I love, the sickness of one of my folks or of myself, or ill-doing, or loss, or lack of money, or depressions, or exaltations, battles, the horrors of fratricidal war, the fever of doubtful news, the fitful events. These come to me days and nights and go from me again, but they are not the me myself. Apart from the pulling and hauling stands what I am, stands amused, complacent, compassionating, idle, unitary, looks down, is erect, or bends an arm on an impalpable certain rest, looking with the side-curved head, curious what will come next, both in and out of the game, and watching and wondering at it. Backward, I see in my own days where I sweated through fog with linguists and contenders, I have no mockings or arguments. I witness and wait. I've been struggling with, balancing family life with creative life because
How old are the kids?
I got a 2.5-year-old and a 3-month-old.
Oh my
actually.
God!
So, yeah,
And you're here.
and I'm
you're
here
alive.
and I got a babysitter watching baby, and I'll be back in 30 minutes because my wife's at work. But you're a parent. What are some strategies you have for being a parent and maintaining a vigorous creative life? Like I noticed from your site and your tour page, like you're touring in a way where you're heading to a region for a weekend and then you're back, and a region for a weekend and then you're back. Like, what are some other strategies that you've developed to help with that?
Well, I'm drinking less.
There you go.
It's not a very sexy, romantic answer, but it really is the truth because I have become a morning person ever since I had the kid. I've acquainted myself with the hours before 10 o'clock. I've never seen them before. They're amazing. And if I can get up early enough and get up before my kid, that's like this magic hour.
Yeah.
Where it's my time. It can be creative time. I use it to blog. I use it to think. I use it to read. That's unheard of in my life pre-child. And I think I've just gone a lot more big picture, and I'm a much more disciplined artist. I don't second guess myself as much because I don't have fucking time to second guess myself. And that's actually, that's where a lot of parents warned me or, encouraged me that this would happen. But when you only have a very limited amount of time because you've got family pulling on you in one direction and sleep over here and adult commitments left and right, you can lose a lot of time or maybe gain back a lot of time that you didn't know that you were losing by being a much more fast, efficient, definitive decision maker. The 10 minutes that you might have spent waffling about the decision going like, oh, well, on the one hand, if I do this, but if I do this, and instead of just going like, I know there's a bunch of factors, I'm doing this, let's go. I'll just deal. I'll deal with whatever this decision brings, but I'm not going to waste extra time waffling. So I waffle a lot less, and I faff a lot less on the internet. I don't spend quite as much time as I used to just vaguely scrolling and wandering around the internet, reading depressing news. I sort of I read my news apps. I never look at Facebook anymore. Yeah. I try to stay in touch with the people who really matter to me. And in most ways, the most salient thing that stands out to me since having a kid is that I've just pared down. I've prioritized the people that I really want to stay connected with, the books that I want to read, and that I don't fuck around and waste time. It's funny, like Neil and I have been getting into these discussions about nighttime because especially now that I really have learned, I'm on tour and I'm really trying to protect my voice and prize 8 hours of sleep at all costs. I've started making fun of Neil of how much he faffs at night. Because I'll be like, this is it, we're golden, it's 9:30, let's go to bed. And and Neil's like, okay, yes, Lord, let's go to bed, then we can wake up early and we'll get all these things done. He's British. And then he'll check one last thing and do one last thing and then go into the bathroom and get distracted by his phone and then wander downstairs and remember that he forgot. And then it's 11:30.
For no reason.
For lots of little micro reasons, but that is actually something that I've gotten really good at cutting out. Yeah. It's it's over. I'm done. The phone is off. It's in a drawer. I know that if I go to sleep now, I will reap these immense benefits of morning hours. Instead of waking up at 9, I'm going to be up at 7, and I'm going to get 2 delicious hours of my brain awake. Because my brain between 11 and 1 is just useless. It will just sit there and scroll through Instagram, and then 2 hours will be gone, and I'll wonder what the fuck happened. But in the morning, I don't, in the morning, my thoughts are really vibrant. I'm really awake. I'm really creative.
Yeah.
There's light.
Yeah,
So
but
there's a payoff. Like, you really have to be disciplined and go the fuck to bed.
it makes me think of those scientists. Scientists that are working on things, and you can only get limited amounts of time on a supercomputer to run like your algorithm, whatever it is. So
Yeah,
they
that's
wait
the morning-
years those are your times at
morning
the
hours.
supercomputer, for
Yeah.
sure. Did you made an album with your father around the same time that you became a parent yourself? Was that the reason why that you had gone back and reevaluated that?
Actually, that didn't have so much to do with me being. I was pregnant when I made the record, but it actually had more to do with my Patreon. There was like a triptych in my life right around that time. I started my Patreon, and I was pregnant, and my best friend and mentor all died, all within a few months of each other.
God.
It was like a huge psychic shift in every direction. And one of the things that the Patreon, which is, for people who don't understand it, it's basically just like a subscription to me as an artist. And there's 15,000 people right now subscribing to me for a few dollars a month to hear whatever I have to say in whatever medium. I can put out an album, I can put out a song, I can do a podcast, I can write an essay, I can publish a poem. And I had a few things on my bucket list. And one of them was making an album with my father. And one was making an album with my songwriting mentor, Edward Caspell. And as soon as I started my Patreon, those were two projects that I took off the back burner and I put right up to the front. Because I knew that the art-making decisions would come first. And once I had the Patreon to financially support the project, no matter what happened with these things commercially, didn't matter. I just wanted to be in a studio with my dad and have fun. And I just wanted to go to England, meet Edward Caspell, co-write a record and put it out and not have to think about the agonizing marketing meetings and sales and will it sell and will it pay for itself? It had all paid for itself because I had patronage.
You just putting it like that, to be in a studio with your father and having fun, that sounds so intimate. That sounds so incredibly intimate to be able to do that with a family member.
Well, so the bizarre part of the story is that my dad and I didn't know each other very well. My parents got divorced when I was under a year old. And then my dad was kind of this distant, unknown figure. I knew him, I visited him, but we just weren't very close. And we didn't really strike up a real grown-up relationship until I was like in my late 20s.
Wow.
So part of doing it was to build a bridge, and it did. It helped a lot.
I'll bet you it did. Yeah, I'm opposite situation. I've always been very close with my dad. My father tours with me now that he's retired and sells merch and stuff like that.
Oh my God, dad merch seller.
Dad merch, man.
That's amazing. Does he sign your merch?
He slangs it. Doesn't know how to take pictures of people in the merch line, though, but we'll work on that. Hey,
you need to get one of your kids to do that as soon as they're old enough.
Yeah, so at age 4, they'll be able to do it, I'm sure. Today's a show day for you. You took all this time out for me. Thank you so much for sitting down with our little podcast. I really appreciate it. That's our show for this month. Thanks for listening. Again, this month's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build beautiful websites for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Amanda Palmer's latest album is entitled There Will Be No Intermission, and she is currently on tour throughout the world supporting it. Today's episode was engineered and mixed by Matt Schusler. Research and editorial direction provided by the intrepid and thorough Paul Barbagallo. If before we meet again, you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and, most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.